Hello and welcome to the bee vlog. After dismantling the Deadouts last episode, it's time to clean up the frames and the boxes and get them ready for the coming season of beekeeping. So I'll show you how I go about doing that. Some of the tools I'll be using are newspaper underlay so that when I'm scraping things down I can catch wax and propolis and reuse that. A wet cloth for cleaning up any honey drippings or water drippings. Things get a little sticky and I like to keep my hands cleaner. A dry cloth for drying my hands. A toothpick for digging things out of the cells like dead bees or chunks of mold. And your hive tool for scraping and getting the frames out of the boxes. Also a bee brush. I don't like to use a bee brush for sweeping bees. I found that they don't like it and they get angry, but it makes a great tool for sweeping and cleaning the comb. The first thing I do is I go through all of the frames and I look for combs that I want to save so that I can reuse in the hives, or combs that I need to take out of the frames and melt down. Here's an example of a comb that I don't want to keep because it's off center in the frame. If I were to keep this, then any of the combs next to it would violate bee space, or the bees would continue to propagate this offset and even make it worse. So this is a comb that I'm going to cut out of the frame, melt it down. Here's an example of a good comb. It's mostly centered within the frame. You can look from the bottom bar and see that you can't really see much comb sticking out on this side. There's a little bit, but it's not bad. It's also very straight. There's no rippling and no turn going on. Sometimes they tend to turn a little bit at the ends. Again, I don't use foundation. These are foundationless frames that the bees have drawn their own comb in. This is why I'm seeing on some frames ripples or offset. Here's a frame that ripples. You can see it ripples down here on the bottom. So this comb I'm going to remove from the frame and melt it down. You can see though that it has some honey up here on the top. I'm actually going to be cutting it under the honey and leaving most of the honey in place and the wax. So I'm only going to be cutting out the bad part here that I don't want in the hive. Because that ripple, if I were to put an empty frame next to it, the comb that's drawn out on the frame next to it will show the same ripple. And that ripple can get worse and magnified down the line on the frames. So I want to help them draw out straight comb by cutting it off, and I'll melt down the bottom half and leave the top half in place. Now here's a frame with comb that I don't want to put back in the hive, but this is such cool looking comb, I'm going to keep it for myself for use in demonstrations and show and tell, showing students or other people who are interested in foundationless frames and foundationless beekeeping. One other criteria that I look for is cell size. Now on this comb here you can see that half of the cells are larger than the other half. The cells over here are a drone size, while the cells over here are a worker size. Now I don't want to give them any drone comb because they're pretty good at drawing out their own drones when they need it. I want to encourage worker brood in the center of the nest, and that's where I'm going to be putting the reused frames. Drone comb they tend to draw out towards the edges of the nest. So this stuff that has drone size cells I'm going to cut out and melt it down. Now this comb here I'm not going to reuse because it's one of the ones that's offset, but it has a bunch of dead bees in it. So if I were to keep this comb, I would need to clean out all those bees that are stuck in there, tail sticking out. So I'll demonstrate how I clean those bees out. You can do this outdoors, but since I'm in my garage, I'm going to do this over a trash can. I take my toothpick and I go under the underside of their abdomen and I kind of get a hook in there and pull them out. Show up close. You can use tweezers. I don't have any tweezers though. So get under the abdomen and just kind of yank them out. That one came out without the head. If you end up breaking some of the comb, some of the cell wall, that's okay. The bees will clean it back up again and fix it. Now if you don't have too many dead bees in there and you don't have a mold problem, you could just leave them alone. You don't have to clean it out because the next swarm of bees that moves in will just clean out all the dead bees for you. If there's a mold problem, like on the other side of that same comb, after you get all the bees out, most of the mold should come with the bees. But you still might have some mold left on the comb, but that's okay, because a little bit of mold is alright. It doesn't bother the bees and they'll clean it off. But that's when you bring in the bee brush and you can just sweep off anything that's excessive. Now you still see a lot of mold here because it's on the bees themselves. And once I clean out all the bees, that won't be a problem. Right now it's pretty cold out in my garage, because it's about 30 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And handling these frames can be delicate because the wax, when it's this cold, is very brittle. And if I were to drop the frames, or if I'm kind of dropping the boxes and not being careful, it can actually cause the comb to crack and dislodge from the frame. Also in cutting, it may want to just kind of break apart on you. So when I cut the wax out, if there's some part of it I want to save, I do have to be careful I don't cut it free from the frame. But you'll notice that when I cut, it kind of cracks and it's not soft. I begin by cutting it away from the frame. This side I'm going to leave intact because I want to leave that part of the comb there. I'm going to cut around that. But I like to use a long serrated knife. And you see how it just kind of is very brittle and basically falls apart on me. And that piece is ready to be melted down, while I left some in the frame for the bees to reuse. Now here's a comb that has honey on the sides and drone comb right in the middle. So I'm going to reuse this frame, but cut the drone comb out. And whenever they build drone comb on one side, it's usually always drone comb on the other. That's ready to be melted. This is just about ready to be reused. I just have to clean the propolis off the shoulders, and then it's done. Now on the frame shoulders, this is where the frames come in contact. The bees like to stick a lot of propolis in that crack in between the frames. You can see where they would touch. Now, if you don't clean that off, when it tends to build up like that, then each time you take the frames apart, it starts to add up and build up, and then you can't get the frames into the box because they become wider here and they don't fit anymore. So before putting these frames back into service, I scrape off the propolis here, and this propolis can be saved and reused for other projects or other purposes. I like to scrape it all the way down to wood. make sure that it will always fit. You need to do that on both sides. So that's the other reason I work over newspaper, so I can, when I'm done scraping everything down, I can just fold up the newspaper and pour the propolis chunks and flakes into a cup or a jar to save for later. And that frame is nice and clean. No dead bees. It's a good looking straight comb. This frame is ready for reuse. Now the boxes get quite a bit of propolis built up here on this rabbet where the frames rest. And that also has to be scraped down so that it's easier to move the frames. You can use the hook end of the hive tool to get in and scrape it clean. Both edges of the rabbet. If there's a lot of propolis along the top edge of the box here, you can get some of that off too. You don't need to get that too clean though. I leave the propolis that's in the corners down here. You can see that this box has some splotches of propolis in there, and that's really a good thing. I don't want to take that out. I just want to take it where it's been built up here on this rabbet, so the frames don't interfere too much and they're easier to remove when necessary. And if there's some comb that's been attached to the side walls of the box, I scrape that down too. Now that box is ready to be put back into service. I should mention that these hives didn't die from an infectious disease. If they had American foul brood, then the cleanup process would be much different. These frames and the combs would have to be destroyed by fire, and the inside of the boxes would have to be torched out to kill off the infection. In this case though, they just froze in the winter. There's no cause for alarm and no suspicion of any kind of foul brood infection.